So let's get right into the conventions that happened the last 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago was the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, and this past week was the Republican National Convention, or the RNC. And I wanted to first touch on just some general thoughts I had after watching both conventions, and then we'll get into a few other topics. But as far as the RNC goes, I actually think they pulled off a more put together convention than the DNC, even though the DNC had, seemingly all of Hollywood on their side as far as like the most famous directors, actors, production companies, film studios, TV studios, whatever you can name. I mean, they had it all at their fingertips, and it didn't really go that well for them. And so I was trying to think of why did this happen, And I was thinking that the DNC really has backed themselves, and the Democrats in general have really backed themselves into a corner as far as the virus goes and as far as relatability. And they really had to make it look as Zoomy or a Zoom conference or a video conference, whatever you want to call it, as possible, because their whole narrative that they're pushing to try to win the election is America's in shambles, this is the new normal type narrative. And so they really had to make sure that the Zoom video boxes and social distancing and the effects that the coronavirus has had on America was at the forefront of the conversation, which I'm not saying that they shouldn't have had that at the forefront, but the reason I think the RNC pulled off a better convention was because they mentioned coronavirus, but people, when they were watching, even if maybe they didn't really agree with what was being said at the RNC, it did feel like a more normal convention, even though it was not the most traditional setup. When you were watching, it felt like things were getting back to normal. You only saw a few masks. You saw people getting up to speak at the same location, not just panning or cutting to different households across the country. It was, okay, everyone's at one location. Granted, there isn't a big audience most of the time, except for, of course, Melania Trump's speech and President Trump's speech, which I'll talk about later on. But so I thought that was the main difference between the two, and I actually liked the RNC personally better, the way they handled it. Even objectively, I think it was done a little better. Of course, I'm someone who I think kind of the social distancing mask thing has gotten out of hand as far as the restrictions goes, but I think they balanced it well for the RNC, and the DNC just, it seemed a little ridiculous. And when and I think the RNC really took note from the DNC as far as the way to do a virtual conference or convention. And one example of this, which I think was kind of the shining example of why it didn't really work for the DNC, was a little bit of banter between Andrew Yang, who was a Democratic nominee, and you may know him for pushing the UBI, Universal Basic Income, which obviously has become a center topic amongst everybody in response to the coronavirus. And it was his little interaction with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who is an actress who actually plays a VP on the show Veep. I haven't actually watched the show, but I think it was an interesting pick, and they may have done it on purpose. I don't know. She's won a lot of awards for that role, and I'll just leave her connections to kind of elite, very wealthy families aside for now, but which was an interesting pick in my opinion, but whatever. But their interaction was, it was Andrew on this side and then Julia Louis-Dreyfus on this side, and they were, I don't know if they were in like different locations or they were trying to appear to be in different locations. I don't know. But when you're trying to do like a comedic banter, like what I thought when I was seeing it, they were trying to do like an awards show type presentation when they're out presenting awards, when you have two people kind of doing an intro to something. And it just didn't work. It was the delay between the two. You could tell it was like an actual Skype call or Zoom call. It was so awkward because like the punchline or the setup or the little quirky comment between the two was always like delayed by a few seconds, and you can tell they were trying to like make it seem normal, but it clearly is just so not normal. And so I thought that was an interesting kind of example of how it didn't really work for the DNC, and the RNC didn't even try to do that. They just had clips that they had already prepared, or they had speakers come out one by one that were in many cases pre-recorded, from what I understand. They were live recorded, meaning they didn't like do like 3 takes and then cut it together to find the best version of it, but they weren't like live streamed speeches, if that makes sense. So, and I think a lot of it, I saw people kind of comparing it to when, for instance, Beyonce. We know she can sing live, but when she does her concerts, she records a live track that she then plays at the concert and then does the dancing and all the production behind it. So it's her singing live, but it's a recorded version of her singing live, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I think it's called playback, is what they really call it. So overall, I thought they were both actually pretty similar, the DNC and RNC, as far as what they kind of focused on, which was mostly identity politics, because unfortunately that's the world we live in right now, is kind of pointing out people's color of their skin, their race, their gender, their privilege, their class, whatever socioeconomic class, their location, whatever it may be. And the advantage the RNC had was that they actually implemented more policy talk and success stories from Trump's policies, which I kind of see as the direction that the RNC is going until the election is decided, considering that Biden's policy record, there's a lot there to kind of bash or bring up that could actually hurt him and help Trump. So that was kind of like my overall thoughts on the conventions.